Alright, so this section is P2, which is the Cartesian coordinate system. Let's talk about absolute value. You learned that the absolute value means the distance away from 0. You may have also learned that anytime you take the absolute value of something, you always get a positive answer. This notation that is written here, okay, so this notation here states that the absolute value of a number equals, and it has different choices of how you can write your answer. It is A, so if I'm finding the absolute value of A, it is A, which was the original value inside if A started out as a positive number. So if you take the absolute value of a positive number, you get the exact same positive number answer. Okay, so you get whatever you're starting with, if it's positive, then you get the same answer when you're done. If you're taking the absolute value, so here's our second case right here. If you're taking the absolute value of a negative, okay, so absolute value of A will give you, instead of looking at this as negative A, think of this as the opposite of A. So if the starting value inside the absolute value is negative to begin with, then your answer is going to be the opposite of what it was. Okay, so if this was negative 5 inside here, you get positive 5. Okay, and just think of it as negative or opposite of the negative 5 is positive 5. And last case is, what if A actually started out as 0 to begin with? Well, absolute value of 0 is 0. So looking at just a couple of examples, we have the absolute value of negative 3. So we know that the absolute value of negative 3 is equal to positive 3. So again, if we start with a negative number inside the absolute value, we get the opposite of it, which is positive. Alright, now we're going to do the absolute value of e minus 7. Now e looks like a variable, but remember e is a number, so we have to figure out what that is. Alright, so if we were to take e, which is approximately 2.71, and subtract 7, we would get a negative value. So they're giving us e minus 7 inside the absolute value is a negative value. So according to our rules, if we start with a negative value, our answer is the opposite. Okay, so it's the opposite of this. So it's going to be, our answer is going to be negative of e minus 7. And if we simplify that, you distribute the negative, you get negative e plus 7, which actually can be written as 7 minus e. And we can actually skip some of these steps in here, and we can just say that absolute value of e minus 7 is 7 minus e. And again, what we're doing is we're deciding if the value inside the absolute value is positive or negative to start. If it was positive, then the answer will just remain the same. It will remain that positive value, whatever it started with. But if it's negative inside there, we know the absolute value of a negative number is positive. It's the opposite sign. So we did opposite of what we had inside. Alright, let's try this next one. Absolute value of pi minus 1. Well, pi we know is approximately 3.14. When we subtract 1 from that, we get approximately 2.14. So we get a positive value. So the absolute value of a positive number is the same positive number. So absolute value of pi minus 1 is equal to just pi minus 1. It's started positive, keep it positive, so it stays exactly the same. Alright, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about distance. When you're finding the distance between two numbers, okay, so we're not talking about points with x's and y's on the Cartesian coordinate system, on the x and y axis. We're only just talking about two numbers. To find the distance from one number to the other, what you just do is you subtract them, but because distance is always positive, you will have to take the absolute value. So the distance between two numbers a and b is a minus b, but it's the absolute value of it. Okay, so if you have to find the distance between two numbers, subtract them and find the positive answer or take the absolute value. To find the distance between 2 points, so that's, we have value 2 actual points, right, in the parentheses, comma, so x, y, x, y. We have a formula. So the distance formula is the square root of x minus x squared plus y minus y squared. Now when you first learned the distance formula, they had little subscripts. So maybe it was x sub 1 minus x sub 2, or maybe it was backwards, vice versa. But it doesn't matter which x value you subtract first, because it doesn't matter if you get a positive or negative there. When you square a positive or a negative, they both become positive anyway. Okay, so the order of the x's and y's don't actually matter. So it doesn't matter which x you subtract first, it doesn't matter which y you subtract first. When you get answers for using the distance formula, finding the distance, please make sure that you leave your answer as exact values. Okay, so that means if you have a square root in your answer, you're going to simplify the square root. If it's square root of 25, you know that that's 5, that's fine. But if you get the square root of 29, don't tell me that the answer is 5 point something. Just simplify the square root if you can. All right, so if we were to find the distance between these 2 points, we just use our distance formula. All right, so we subtract our x's, so -3 minus -2. We're going to square that, plus, now we're going to subtract our y's, 5 minus 1 squared. Okay, so we get -3 minus -1, that changes to plus. So we have -1 squared, which is just 1, plus 5 minus 1 is 4, squared is 16, so we get the square root of 17, which can't be simplified, so that is the answer. Alright, now let's review midpoint. So if we're finding the midpoint of just two numbers, okay, so I'm just looking for the midpoint of 2 and 28, okay, we need two numbers. What we're just going to do is you're just going to add the two numbers and you're going to divide by 2. You're finding the average of the two numbers. That's all it is. So if we're trying to find the midpoint of 2 points, okay, so we've got our, whatever our 2 points are, they would be given. They'd be given in parentheses with a comma. And these would need to be the end points of some kind of a segment to find the midpoint. Then your formula is find the average of the x's. So you're going to add them and divide by 2. Find the average of the y's. And you're going to divide by 2. Again, the order of what you're adding the x's does not matter, because when you're adding, order does not matter. So this time, the example is we have one end point of a segment is 4, -3, and the midpoint is -2, 1. And we're supposed to be finding the other endpoint. You can use the formula to find the answer. Okay, so if you want to use the formula, then you would be setting up 4 is one endpoint, 1x of one endpoint, plus we don't know the other endpoint x, divided by 2. So that would be equal to -2, and you could solve that. And then we look at the y's. -3 plus, I don't know the y of the other endpoint, so I'm just going to put y divided by 2 will equal the y of the midpoint, 1. So you can just cross multiply. And then solve. And same thing for the y's. So -3 plus y equals 2. Add 3 to both sides, so y equals 5. So the other endpoint was -8, 5. Okay, now you could also just look for a pattern. If we have the endpoint, midpoint, and we don't know the other endpoint, we're just going to say from endpoint to midpoint is the same distance from midpoint to the other endpoint. So how far is it from 4 to -2? Well, it went down 6. So 4 minus 6 is -2, so subtract 6, and you'll get that the end point x value is -8, because -2 minus 6 is -8. Now how did we get from -3 to 1? We went up 4, so we're going to go up 4 more. 1 plus 4 is 5. And notice we got the same answer using either method. It really doesn't matter.